So as of now, the class is being recorded, and I will send you an email explaining how you can get onto my YouTube site so that everything that is said in class will be available on YouTube, and you can consult it and use it as a study aid to reinforce what I'm saying in the lectures. Anything that isn't clear, you go to this YouTube site and there's the lecture. It's a means of sort of reinforcing and ensuring that you're getting the information. Are there any questions about this? Okay, so there's that, but then I want you to sign this roll because I want you to be in class and I want there to be a discussion as much as possible, although this is a crappy room, terrible room for discussion. Nevertheless, as much as possible, I would like your participation. So, is there, oh yes, there's one other thing. There's a Miss Ferguson in the room. Is she here? Miss Ferguson? I'd like to get in touch with her. Okay, so what is this course? Well, it's History 137, Modern World History from 1500 to 1789. And we're doing this section of the hour is devoted to simply introducing the syllabus, the basic outline mechanisms. The next class, we get into more detail. So my name is Professor Henry Heller. I've been here a lot of years. I know my stuff. And I have an office on campus. It's not in this building. It's way over on the other side of the building, the campus, past the library. University College is where I hang out. My room number is given. You have my office numbers, my phone numbers. You have my email address on the syllabus. And the best way to get in touch with me, to discuss something or to set up a meeting, I have office hours, but we can set up a meeting anytime you like, by just emailing me and say you want a meeting and so on. And, I'm happy to do that. So email is the best way of getting in touch. Any questions about what I've said? I'm going to keep saying any questions, obviously. Okay, the course description. This course, History 137, surveys global history from the beginning of European expansion, 1500, to the Industrial Revolution at the beginning of the 19th century. In other words, it covers this period from the time of Columbus, okay? Columbus, discoverer of the New World, etc. You know about that. Supposedly to discover the New World. There's a lot of fighting about that today. Everything is contested today, you have to understand. And then we go for 300 years down to the Industrial Revolution, which is the development of modern industry, and therefore we can say fully modern times. We're dealing with what's called early modern times. Modern times, really, you could say, begins with the Industrial Revolution, but also there was another revolution around about that time. Does anybody know the name of that revolution? Yes?
The Agricultural Revolution?
The French Revolution. The French Revolution. 70. So there was a simultaneous economic revolution located in England and a French Revolution on the continent. And really, this changed everything. We still exist in the shadow of those two revolutions. So that's a really crisis point. But so is 1500. 1500 really marks an incredible takeoff that is interesting in its own right, and we're going to be dealing with that at the beginning. Any questions? Okay. Now, I just note that there's a follow-up course you could take in the next term called Global History from 1800 to the present, which takes you down to the present times, and the two are sort of twinned. Now, what I do in this course, I use European history, if you like, Western history, as basically the thread to examine successive important civilizations that existed at the beginning of this period. Contact between Europe and the rest of the world was rather limited. There was some contact across Eurasia and into Africa, but until Columbus, contact with the New World, North and South America, was limited. I am going to successively describe these various independent cultures and civilizations, give you a sense of what they were all about, their dynamic, their inner movement, which is quite independent of the West. I'm talking about, of course, the cultures of Latin America, the Aztec, the Maya, the Inca. I'm talking about the cultures of Africa. I'm talking about the culture of India, China, and the Middle East. We're going to overview all of these things. But we're going to do this, and then we're going to see how the Europeans intruded themselves and slowly began to modify, intrude, invade, and ultimately undermine these successive cultures. So a very important theme here is the way these cultures began to sort of deteriorate in the face of the advance of the Europeans. And we're going to try and learn how this happened, why it happened. What were, up until 1500, we can say, not only was there relatively little contact, but there was a kind of rough equilibrium between these different societies. There was a certain balance. And if I had to choose or decide, I would say that if there was a center of global, the global economy, put it that way, there was some trade. It was not the West. No, it was China, which had long been the most powerful state on the globe. And we're going to see how, in effect, during this period, all of these cultures, except for this West European culture, begin to deteriorate in the face of the pressure from the West. And that includes China as well. Are there any questions about what I've said? Okay. Now, I'm briefly now going to talk a little bit about the course is based on these lectures, obviously, which are going to be recorded and which will be available on YouTube. And I'll sort of explain that as we go along. Now, oh yeah, in a certain way, so I'm talking about the structure of the course now. I'm not talking about content, we're talking about the structure. So I'm giving you these lectures, and the question is, well, how much am I, there's a huge amount of information that I'm supplying here. So how are you going to prep for the exams. Well, there's only one exam in this course. It comes at the end. It's the final exam, okay? And the way I'm doing this, if you look at the back of the syllabus, the last page of the syllabus, there's a set of review questions at the back, 31 in all. I think you see that if you look at if you have your syllabus. And these questions, they are the final exam questions. I'm giving you the final exam questions to begin with. And not only am I giving you those, but as we go along and record it on YouTube, I will specify we're doing question 1 or we're doing question 4, and I will give you a presentation of the key elements with which to answer those review questions. So in terms of these lectures, in terms of your work, this is key to sort of grasping what you need to know on the final exam. And the final exam will be based on these 31 questions, which I'm reviewing and which you can get up on YouTube. They're available on YouTube so that you can review what I've said on ReviewTube. So it's a matter of, in terms of your effectiveness in this class, grasping these review questions is the key, okay? That's the key to dealing with the examination. At the end of the course, which comes, of course, in December, I will choose 9 of these review questions, and on the final exam, you answer 3 of them. And not only that, this is a take-home exam. It's a take-home exam. I will send you the exam by email. You write the answer to 3 of these 9 questions, and that's the final exam. Okay, that's worth. I specify 30% of the 30% of the grade. Okay. Questions? Yes.
How long is this going to be, like the final exam? How much are you expecting?
I beg your pardon?
How much writing are you expecting?
How much writing?
Yes.
On a question?
Yes.
3 or 4 pages. 3 or 4 as an answer. Yes.
If the exam is take home, does that mean it's also
What's that?
If the exam is take home, does that mean it's also
It's a take home. You understand?
It has to do with open book.
I didn't hear that.
If we can use our notes to write the final exam, like can we use our notes as reference while we're writing the exam?
Yeah. So that's the exam. Then the other part of the course consists of developing an essay in 3 stages, which you can see in the syllabus. Development of an essay. Now, this essay, you're going to basically be based on an analysis of 2 books, and specifically in certain pages in these 2 books. You will extract a certain amount of material from these 2 books. The first part of the first stage of this essay development will be basically answering a series of questions, and that will be marked. And then the answers to those questions will be the basis for writing an essay. And that will be marked. First draft of a written out essay. And finally, the last stage is based on the criticisms, based on the marking, you present a finished essay at the end. So there is 3 stages. Why am I doing this? Because And this is the cumulative mark is 60% of the grade. If you see, if you look, if you follow, why am I doing it? I'm doing it in order for you to seriously learn how to write at the university level. That is to say, if you follow these 3 steps, and you sort of carefully look at this, at the end of this process, when you present the final essay, and we're not talking about a book, we're not even talking about an article, we're talking about an essay, which is about 8 pages or something like that. This will be a finished piece of work with based on a critical sort of understanding of the material and based on the use of a sense of organization, a sense of rational analysis and assembly, and then wrapped up in good prose. And if you can do that, you can do that not only in this course, you can do that in every course in the Faculty of Arts or beyond the Faculty of Arts. So this exercise, if you like, is very important in terms of the development, your development as a university student. Because if you do this seriously, it will open the door for you in terms of your ability to cope with any arts course given in the faculty, and beyond that. I would say that in terms of your university experience, the 2 things that you need to get out of a university experience, in my opinion, are the ability to write and the ability to use numbers. Those are the 2 skills that you need. Now, why do you need these skills? Well, to become a person who can express themselves, who's effective intellectually, who is able to deal with material in a critical way, to develop your skills, your capacity. That's the most important reason, because the world is complicated. The structures, the administrative structures are complicated. The requirements that that are demanded you as a human being are complicated, but also from a practical sense, getting a job, now we're talking what's basic here, economics, getting a job. If you can present yourself to an employer with the ability to do an effective report, an effective critical report, and you know how to write, you know how to think, and you also hopefully acquire the numeracy, as we say, the ability to use numbers, you're equipped for this world, okay? So that's why we're doing this. And we'll see how far you get, okay? Are there any further questions about this? Okay. So I think I'll leave it at that. So and we'll go into greater detail in the next class about this. What I want to do now is have a little discussion, and then maybe I will talk a bit. So in this email that I sent you last week, I asked you to sort of look up the definition of ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism. Can anybody explain to me what ethnocentrism is? Yes.
When you examine another culture using your own cultural biases.
Yes. Anybody else have a sort of a supplementary view of what they think about this? Yes.
I think it also means that you believe that your views are superior to others.
Right. Anybody else? And I think you probably know what I mean. You know, in terms of ordinary life, most people, obviously, people belong to different ethnic groups, and the thing is that based on development of different peoples, nationalities, and religions. People come, interact in the world based on these preconceptions, and they have an important bearing on the way people interpret the world and the way they act in the world. And there is a lot of, and a lot of this is based simply on biases and prejudice. Okay? And in order to do history, or in order to do something like sociology, or to do anthropology, or more generally, you have to try and break out of that ethnocentricity. You have to begin to see things from another point of view. And you have to be able to project yourself. That's one of the basic skills that a historian has to have. And I believe a human being in this world has to have. Now, I mentioned this world. Why is it important in this world that we're living in, say, even a place like Winnipeg, which is filled with so many different kinds of people now? As you know, Winnipeg as a city has been transformed. We have people living from every part of the globe. Why is it important to sort of not be ethnocentric in your approach to other people? Why is it important? Yes.
So you can empathize with other people?
Yes. Anybody else want to say anything? Yeah.
You'll never fully understand their culture.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything to add? Yes, in the back. Could you speak up?
You can't really create your own opinion if you only have one view of the world, because then it's not really, I guess, well-grounded in the opinion that you have. It just be influenced by the neighbor race.
Yes.
I would say respect and understanding.
Yeah, so I think you get it. And of course, when we're dealing with this course, we're going to be dealing with these West European people. Many of them are the ethnic groups out of which they come are largely German in the West, at least, German and Celtic. These people were Christians, but as you'll see, we go to these other parts of the world and people have a very different value system. And what we want to do, one of the things we want to do is to try to understand where the other people were at, where exactly were the Incas at, what was their mental universe, what was the mental universe of the people from South Asia, from India, likewise China, and so on and so on. You understand? So that's the sort of attitude that I would like to sort of try to develop. One can do that, and it's perfectly legitimate to also have a sense, a critical sense. But as a methodology, it is basic to the work of historians. So we've dealt with ethnocentrism, but what about the second term, Eurocentrism? I think the definition of that is rather obvious, but yes.
Eurocentrism was an idea that came out specifically in the 15, 16, 1700s that saw Europe as the sort of driving force of history and the center of the world. And that it was also Europe's right to kind of dominate the world.
Yes. Eurocentrism is very important, as you're pointing out, because the Europeans began after 1492 to interact with the rest of the world, and as it turns out, the Europeans were quite aggressive. You know, they've been fighting one another for 1,000 years. They had an enormous military capacity, and their interaction with the rest of the world, there were moments of peace, but there was a lot of fighting, and the Europeans were they intruded, and they began to subordinate. They did subordinate, and they began to subordinate these other people. And they brought with them, you could even say it helped them, this sense of European superiority. Europe somehow was better than these other places. These other people were not civilized. Indeed, they were savages and barbarians, which of course was not true. But this was the common attitude of these European conquerors. It gave them confidence. And it was reinforced. It was reinforced by the European strong belief that their religion, namely Christianity, was the only true faith, the only true religion. And so they came out there and they not only tried to impose themselves politically and militarily, but also ideologically. They tried to enforce their faith on other people. And if you can conquer people's minds, you don't have to use muskets or swords to control them. If you can control their minds, if the others are made to accept the idea that, yes, these people are bring us the true religion, so they must be right and we must obey them. That's an important way of controlling people. Very important. And of course, as it happened, because the Europeans were so successful, they were the ones who got to write history. Europeans wrote history. And the history was Eurocentric. The history was Eurocentric. It was written from the European point of view. So the whole framework of sort of interpreting the word, so what does this all mean, was Western, Eurocentric. And what we see today is really attempts to sort of restructure the teaching of history, the understanding of history, certainly in the classroom, but beyond the classroom, general culture, to try and break out of this Eurocentric way of looking at things and to sort of understand other people's points of view. Of course, it doesn't deal with the problem of political and economic inequality. We understand that, but at least it's sort of a beginning. And of course, this course partly endeavors to do this. But of course, that being said, this is the way I'm proceeding. At the same time, I'm one of those people who believe that, yes, we have to do that, but we have to also recognize that we can't avoid the fact that these Europeans were extraordinarily successful in essentially conquering the rest of the world. And so we have to understand that process of conquest. Why they were so successful is a very important question to answer. Now, this, of course, and I want to just say that if you look at, say, the writing of history, the teaching of history in this university, you can see something of what I'm talking about if I just review for you the way history was taught, because it changed. It changes. If we look back 50 or 60 years, what do we find? You can go back to the old sort of calendars and see what professors were teaching students 50 or 60 years ago at the University of Manitoba. Well, if you wanted to take a first-year history course at the University of Manitoba, in fact, you had to take the first-year course in order to do further historical studies. The introductory course was the history of England, of all things. The introductory course at the University of Manitoba 60 years ago was the history of England. Now, why the hell was that the case? England is this small island. Today, it's in deep trouble. And anybody who follows the news, you know that there's this huge crisis developing in England as I speak. And from a economic point of view, I'm not saying that it doesn't have some influence, but its influence has withered. So why back in, say, what are we talking about, the 50s or early 60s, why was the history of England the introductory course at the University of Manitoba? Yes. What's that?
It may related to history of Europe.
Yes.
So we talk about it.
So that's the way it was. And then came the 60s, rock and roll. And things, the 60s were exciting. I lived through them. The world was in upheaval. Canada was in upheaval. And suddenly, instead of teaching the history of England, it remained, and they were teaching it at the upper level and so on, but a new course was introduced. It was called the History of Western Civilization. Suddenly, we're no longer dealing with just England, but suddenly we're teaching the history of Western civilization. Why were we doing that? Why did that happen? It was the Cold War. It was the Cold War. The United States was in charge. And this course, the history of Western civilization, was first introduced at these two elite American universities, Columbia and Harvard. You've heard of Columbia and Harvard, you know about those places. And they're amazing. And that's where you have very good professors and you have very rich students. The students are rich. That's where they go. That's where they're trained. And this course, the history of Western civilization, it taught a subtitle that was often given to it with humor was from Plato to NATO. From Plato to NATO. Because the central institution in the West of the Cold War was NATO. And who was in charge of NATO? The United States of America. All the other states, including Canada, were subordinated to the United States. And so, this course, the history of Western civilization, we're all part of the same team. We all have the same cultural heritage, same cultural and historical heritage. So that's the way history is presented. But today we see now the history department is now teaching. They haven't forgotten Western civilization. You can still take it, and it's still worthwhile course. But the shift has been towards world history because the world has gone global. We're not talking any longer simply about the Eurocentric domination of the world, or at least some people are not talking that way. We're talking about a global society, a global economy, a global culture. So we need to look at history, we need to look at the past from the perspective of this more global view. So that's what we get global history. Now, I want to say that to continue this, I would say that we are now living in World War III. The times that we are living in right now, we're at war. The United States is at war. Canada is at war. And the NATO alliance is at war. Who are they at war with? Does anybody know?
Russia and China.
That's right, Russia and China. We are living in interesting times. We're living in dangerous times. And what is the the nub of the conflict? What is it all about? What is it? And when I say we're at war, of course, the war is going on. The actual military conflict is going on in the Ukraine, but we know that the NATO alliance. I'm sure you follow the news. You know what's going on, including Canada. Canada's up to its ears in this. Are supporting the Ukrainian government against the Russians, and the Russians are in an alliance with China. And so this conflict. Well, what is the conflict about? Well, the conflict is basically we come back to this idea of a Eurocentric world, because the issue basically simply is that the United States was heir to a world in which the Europeans, the Westerners, were dominant in the world. Of course, it all started with the Spaniards, it continued with the Dutch, then the English, and now the United States, after especially 1945. This is a succession of empires, of hegemonic powers, which have dominated the world since 1500. And so we are at a moment when this dominance, this hegemony, is now being challenged, seriously challenged, by Russia, which refuses to accept any longer this hegemony, but especially, of course, with the emergence of China. And we could say China, but also the global South. So then, this course, which I'm sure you entered thinking, well, I'll learn all about Columbus, etc., and maybe a little bit of the history of France, and you certainly will. But this course takes on new significance because this course is about the rise of Western dominance, and we are now living in a period when this has now come under serious challenge. And many people are saying that this Western dominance, and I personally believe this, is coming to an end. And we're going to be living, if we survive this period of great tumult, great disorder and tumult, interesting times, as the Chinese say. If we survive this period, we're going to be living in a multipolar world. Instead of a world of dominant empires, of unilateral power, there's going to be a multipolar world, so that this course is pregnant with significance, because we're going to be telling the story of how the West came to dominate the world in the light of what is happening today. So are there any questions or comments about this? Now speak up so that I can hear you. What's that?
Would you not say that we're in a multipolar world right now?
What's that?
Would you not say that we're in a multipolar world right now?
Are we not living in a multipolar world right now?
Yeah.
Well,
You said it will come to be.
bottom line, the United States is not accepting that. That's what the struggle is about. The United States wants to preserve its position. And they're trying to use themselves and their allies, and Canada has had to participate because we are dominated by the United States in this project. They insist that everybody wants to live in a global environment because the economy requires globalization. But is the United States going to be in charge of it, or is there going to have to be a multipolar arrangement where this global world, which is being forced upon us is it going to be based on basically cooperation between these different countries, or are we going to have more and more serious conflict? And I point out to you that this global economy, in order for it to operate, it has to operate globally. At this point, the interdependence that we have is so great, we need to move towards greater integration. Instead, we see these emerging blocks, these militarized blocks emerging. Now that's very dangerous, because World War I, what do you think it was about? It was about these different blocks fighting one another. World War II, what was that about? Same thing. Fight between these antagonistic blocks. And now look what we see. We see the emergence of this system of increasingly antagonistic, not merely militarily, but economically. And so that's why I say we're living in dangerous times, because the possibility of war is real. So, or it's already begun. Yeah.
Are there any other power blocks that you would identify other than
Are there any other power blocks?
and China and Russia?
Well, there are a lot of powers that are caught in the middle, right? And some of them, especially in the global south, like India and so on, which is economically a very strong country, they don't want to be squeezed by these two blocks. But so far, it's just a bipolar situation. In any case, so to sum all of this up, what I want to say, sort of in concluding this this opening lecture, is that yes, we're talking about the basic facts of early modern history. I'm going to give you a strong narrative of European development, and then what Latin America was like, what Africa was like, etc., India. I'm going to do all that. You're going to get a strong narrative, but we have to very much understand that we're looking at history certainly in its own terms, but we're also looking back from the present, and we have to understand what's happening in relationship to what is happening now. So with that, I think I'll terminate the first lecture. Somebody has the nominal role. Could you bring it up to the front? And those of you who have not got the syllabus, I sent an email to everybody, but if you, in case you haven't gotten, come up front and write your email address, and I'll send it. I'll resend it. Excuse me.